When I first started college, my university gave me a list of writing classes that were required for freshmen. I didn't get my first choice, but I was intrigued when I got placed in a class based on human and civil rights. It was actually a great class all in all. I learned a lot and even met Chloe, a girl I now consider to be my soul sister. My professor didn't seem too odd at first. He had that kind of hippie vibe to him and was very passionate about human and civil rights. It also turned out he was the head of the political science department at the university. When we first got together, he boasted about how excited he was to have a class that consisted only of women. I didn't really find that inherently off-putting, though. I thought it was kind of cool how he was so excited, actually. But my friend and I later analyzed a lot of things he said, and we saw it in a very different light after. As time went on, I got closer and closer to Chloe. Her and I would get coffee and discuss the reading material quite frequently, which eventually branched out to partying and hanging out outside of class as well. She used to joke that our professor liked us the most because we were the loud mouths of the class, in the sense that we were always the ones taking part during discussions. That, combined with him praising our 100% female class, were not huge red flags for me at the time. The biggest event that kind of bothers me now is the trip up to his cabin in the mountains. He had asked us all as a class to accompany him to his cabin almost an hour and a half away from the university, in the middle of the mountains. We all thought it was a bit odd. Well, some of us at least. He brought food up and cooked us a large lunch. It was actually kind of nice to just have a candid conversation with the girls. My professor even brought his wife along on the trip too, so it didn't really seem that weird at first. However, he remained kind of touchy with us. Nothing major, just lots of resting hands on our shoulders while talking to us, or trying to get by us. I ended that semester and left that university right after finals. I realized that my university didn't have the program I wanted, so I transferred my credits and started going to another school instead. My friend was dismayed, but we still hung out and did a lot of our work together. She even took another class with him. She said she'd taken him on as an academic advisor and worked more closely with him. Again, no immediate red flags from her. That was until she texted me one day, asking if I'd heard the news about him. Since I didn't really go there anymore, I was amazingly unaware of everything that had happened. Turned out he had been forced to resign. It was in the local news, as the university was getting ripped to shreds for handling the situation so poorly. Apparently, there was a convention or event or something, and the school's political science department went. The president was a female, and I guess he asked her to meet him at his hotel room to discuss the next day's itinerary. When she showed up, he was not fully dressed, and invited her to wait while he finished getting ready for dinner. She hesitantly agreed, and as he dressed, he apparently told her he loved her in the same way he loved his wife, and wanted to be with them both because she was his soulmate. I'm not sure if his wife was in on this or what, but the student immediately reported the incident. Unfortunately, the university offered her a sabbatical, basically asking her to leave. Apparently, the professor didn't even deny this behavior in a hearing with the university officials. My friend and I got together, and suddenly all of his private meetings with her and I, inviting groups of girls to his cabin in the mountains, it all seemed a bit more off-putting. I always found myself to be a very paranoid person, and as I got older, I tried to shed those thinking habits. But now I wish I'd paid more attention, and maybe been able to intervene and say something before this poor girl was essentially booted out of school in order to protect its reputation. So this happened a number of years ago. I recently discovered Let's Not Meet and thought this might be worth sharing. At the time, I lived in Aberdeen, Scotland. I was a 24-year-old Scottish guy who shared a flat with a 27-year-old Romanian girl. We were friendly, but not quite friends. On her birthday, she asked me if I wanted to go out for a few drinks with her and her other friends. She worked at this really cheap and depressing strippers behind the bar so she could get free drinks. I already had plans, so I didn't go with her after all. I had been there with her before actually, and it was quite the grim atmosphere. Anyway, we both went our own ways on separate nights out. I came home just a little bit drunk. About halfway between 2 and 3 a.m., I grabbed some water to brush my teeth and got into bed. I was awoken at 4 or 5 by some doors in the flat opening and closing, and what sounded like drunken staggering. I assumed it was my roommate who was a little drunk from the bar. No big deal. After a while, though, I could make out her talking quietly, and I could hear the tones of a man responding. I was kind of surprised by this. She had never once before brought someone back from a night out, but hey, it's her birthday. I'm not one to judge. I just wanted to make sure they knew they'd woken me up, however, and to try and make sure I didn't hear anything more than I needed to. I did a rather loud forced cough, so they would hopefully keep things down a bit. I heard a door closed and thought my job was done, so I went back to sleep. We both slept in the next morning. I was up first, though, and started making breakfast in the kitchen. Eventually, she comes through, looking terrible after having been sick in the toilet all morning. She starts getting some water, and I cheekily asked her, "Have fun last night, then?" She kind of wearily responded, "Yeah, it was okay." "Nice try. I know you brought a guy back." She went completely white. "Wait, what? That actually happened?" Confused by her reaction, I asked, "What do you mean?" "I thought that was a bad dream." Turns out she never brought him back. He had followed her all the way home. The lock at the entry of our block flats was broken at the time. She had left the strip club after starting to feel extremely sick and hadn't managed to lock the door to the flat itself as she came in because she thought she was going to hurl and rush to the toilet. When she went back to her bedroom undressed and got in bed, she was almost asleep when she realized she was not alone in her room. When she saw the man, she managed to stammer out the question, "What do you want?" He was alarmed that she'd seen him and hurriedly replied he wanted some water. She was extremely scared, wondering what to do and trying to keep calm, when they heard my cough. My extra loud and hopefully masculine-sounding cough startled him, and the prospect of a man in the flat apparently scared him enough to run away, as he left immediately after. She hurriedly locked the door and went back to bed and passed out. I made her report the incident to the police. They immediately sent 2 officers around to look. They interviewed her and scoured through CCTV. This was apparently not the first time this had happened in the area. It appeared this man was working his way up to an attack of some kind. They said it was lucky I'd coughed and spooked him. They were also convinced she had had something slipped into her drink, but she didn't want to have her urine tested. I think she may have been doing some coke at the time or something. They wanted to make sure she hadn't just mistakenly invited him back, and she pointed out there was no chance of this. When they reviewed the CCTV footage, he could clearly be seen following her home, but they couldn't figure out where he'd gone after he left the flat. So a few years ago, a friend invited me to go to an anime convention with her. I'd never actually been to one before, so I excitedly said yes. On the way, I asked her what a first-timer would need to know. What was the etiquette like? Picture taking, how much did the artists usually charge? Would there be any gross people? That kind of thing. She told me there were basically 3 things you needed to know. 1, always ask before you take someone's picture. 2, avoid the people holding free hug signs. And 3, watch out for what she termed followers. I was about to ask her what this meant, but we had already arrived at the hotel and had a mad scramble to get checked in on time. I helped her and her other friend get into their costumes, so my question went unanswered. For a while, at least. Later on, when we finally hit the convention center, we were walking in and looking around. She leaned over to me and nodded toward a shortish fatty with a blue-streaked blonde bowl cut. As if he'd immediately noticed this from across the room, he stared right at my friend and me. "See him?" she whispered. "Hardcore follower." I found out the hard way what she meant. I glanced up later during a conversation with some other cosplayers I'd met. and saw him standing a ways off, staring at me again. I met his eyes and looked away. He gave me this inexplicably creepy vibe, and I didn't want to encourage him further. I did my best to assume it must be a coincidence. Maybe he'd overheard us talking and decided to eavesdrop. Whatever. But then it happened later again. I was sitting in a panel when I felt someone rustle over beside me. I glance over, and I notice it's him. I escape to the dealer's room. I look up and see he's a few booths away, staring at me. Head to the artist's alley. Suddenly he's a few tables down, this time making more of an effort to blend in with the crowd. I joined in an impromptu dance party in the ballroom when I realized he was weaving his way through the crowd, damn near feeling me up a couple of times. At this point, I went out into the lobby, thinking being in a more open space might make him rethink things and finally leave me alone. Nope. He came right up to me, didn't say a single word, just sat down right next to me and stared at me. I eventually met back up with my friends. The friend who brought me looked right at me and said, "Don't look now, but that follower boy is watching you." I know, he's been following me all day. The next day, I decided to stick with my friend and her friend just in case. Until the afternoon when I got a sudden headache and decided to go back to the hotel room to get some ibuprofen. Now, this particular venue has the convention center separated from the hotel next door by this narrow little bridge over a small creek. I didn't think twice about that bridge until I went to walk across. I saw that guy standing right there, just staring, not saying a word, grinning since he knew I would have to get past him to get where I'm going. I couldn't move, thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe he really was just crossing the bridge. But no, he didn't move a single muscle until my friend appeared. Then he immediately headed back into the hotel. She took me by a different route back to the room, though later on we could hear him tramping around in the hallways. In the end, it took her enlisting the help of some big scary-looking cosplayers I'd befriended at the convention to make him back off. I don't know what they said or did to get him to stop, but quite frankly, I hope it was very painful. I've never posted anything here before. This kind of feels tame, I guess, compared to some of the other things on here, but it still haunts me to this day. This actually happened when I was a teenager, around 14 or 15 years old and in high school. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived a fairly short walk away from the school. We would often go to his place after school ended and hang out for a few hours before I'd walk home. Because we took the same route so often, I knew all of the houses and landmarks along the way. In January, I live in the north, so the winter is pretty cold and snowy. My boyfriend and I started to notice a car had been parked in the same spot for a suspiciously long time. We thought nothing of it at first. Maybe the car had just died in the cold, and whoever owned it couldn't afford to have it towed and repaired. But as spring came and went, and the snow finally melted, the car was still there, parked in the same spot at the end of my boyfriend's street. We passed it almost every day as we walked there after school, and as the days grew warmer, a rotten stench started to rise from the car. I began to joke with my boyfriend. "You know, I bet there's a body in that trunk." We laughed it off together, but we were curious now. One day, we peered inside the car windows as we passed. The car was extremely messy, but not filled with trash or food. A discarded backpack lay across the seat, and papers were strewn about here and there. It looked like any other ordinary car, except we knew it hadn't moved for months now. The smell was indescribable. This smell continued to get worse and worse as the spring turned into summer. One day, when I couldn't come over for some reason, my boyfriend and his dad decided to finally investigate this car. When they did so, they found that the doors were unlocked and the keys were still left inside. That was pretty strange. They went around to the back and popped open the trunk. My boyfriend told me that a swarm of black flies immediately flew up from inside. That smell was definitely coming from the truck. Inside were a collection of black garbage bags. My boyfriend and his dad decided to call the cops at this point. The cops later told us that inside of those bags was rotting meat, cut into pieces. The first pieces they tested belonged to a pig, but a few weeks later, my boyfriend's dad got another call. Under that pig meat were the bones of a human child. Whoever left that car sitting unlocked with the keys inside was obviously hoping it would be stolen. It still gives me the shivers. This story is from a few years ago, probably 2009 or 2010 just about. I was in college at the time, and I used to drive a little manual two-door. It had a back seat, but if you were over 5'6", it was basically impossible to sit in comfortably. I was walking out of a big box store one night when I saw this disheveled woman in complete hysterics outside. She was claiming her boyfriend had taken her paycheck to go get high, and now she couldn't get home. Excuse me, where's home? I asked. She answered it was in a town that was probably about 20 minutes away, but for me, it wasn't that far out of the way to help a crying random lady. During the car ride there, she began to act more and more fidgety. She told me about her history of drug abuse and her abusive druggy boyfriend, how she probably wouldn't even be able to pay rent, all sorts of things like that. Meanwhile, we're driving out to more and more secluded parts of town, and the drive is taking longer and longer. About halfway through this drive, she mentioned she also has a host of mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Now I'm beginning to wonder about the truth of her story. Whatever, I guess that explains the fidgeting if she just got done with a panic attack, adrenaline and whatnot. Finally, after 40 minutes of driving, we reached this house with no lights on and no cars there. She told me she lived with her kids and her mom. She starts to fumble around to hand me money for gas. I told her not to worry about it because my mileage was fine, and she said she needed to pay her rent. She hesitated then. I'm not sure if she hesitated because I was not accepting the money or if she was thinking of doing something else, but here I was alone in the middle of nowhere, near this completely empty house. I turned my GPS on with directions to home to indicate I was now going to leave. Pretty quickly, she got out of the car, but she went in a completely different direction, away from that empty house, and wandered off into the woods. I never saw her again. I'm not sure if she was just scared, or if she was trying to lure me out in the middle of nowhere for whatever reason. A part of me really hopes she really was just coming down from a panic attack after getting left in a parking lot by her abusive druggy boyfriend, and she was just jittery because of that. But while it was happening, I definitely started getting a feeling that something was not right. I thought about it a lot before. I've considered that maybe my manual transmission, my GPS having a phone, which was less common in a college town in 2010, or maybe something else changed her mind about doing anything weird to me, if she was considering it. But I guess it's a relatively happy ending that nothing happened. About 2 years ago now, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night. The drive was about 2 hours or so. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the really creepy kind you see in a lot of movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I knew I was not going to last the drive, but I also didn't come across any place I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't just going to magically go away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from everybody else who was going to come past. The roads were not empty. I had come across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22. and then I fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by this scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few short seconds. Because I was extremely tired still, I didn't even bother looking around, and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by that exact same sound, only it was now 12:40. This time, it really freaked me out, because when I noticed, the sound did not stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just some animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked up into my rearview mirror, and just barely managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car, then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate. Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road. As I came around to it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road, with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there, but I didn't see anyone. When I looked back in my rear view mirror, I didn't see anything. But all of a sudden, this man came sprinting from around the corner. He started screaming at me, shouting, "Hey, you, get the fuck out of your car now!" I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw that guy again. Moral of the story? Don't sleep on the side of a deserted road. I first want to preface this post by saying that I am someone who does suffer from an overactive imagination. I tend to see things that are just not there, or be very sensitive to certain noises. I tend to think this is due to me having Asperger's and move on, but this time was entirely different. I live on the top floor of an apartment that I rent from my family, where I live all by myself. It's nice to receive the independence I yearned for, and it helped me come out of my shell by getting back into exercise, cooking much more, and genuinely going about my day with a wider and happier stride. Now, I've always loved horror, as well as tabletop games. Although I'm a self-confessed coward, I tend to make a good impression with people I meet, thanks to years of growing, therapy, and helping me find myself. I moved into this apartment on winter of 2017. When moving, I noticed the apartment opposite to me was empty. I spoke to my parents about it. They said they never saw who used to live there, but whoever it was soon moved out and was never seen again, only to be visited by bailiffs, which had long since stopped coming. The place had already made me uncomfortable, as I had to face away from that door to unlock mine. The lock on my door was broken for a while, meaning I had to be very specific with how I unlocked it, or the key would end up getting jammed in the lock. Whenever I would turn away, I would always feel these eyes burning into the back of my neck. Looking behind me, I would only see the same white door, my eyes drifting up to the peephole. I once remember staring at that peephole for a whole 5 minutes, looking for any subtle change in the light. Now, I'm quite a big guy at around 250 pounds and 6'1", but that feeling made me feel like I was 6 years old again. Each time I passed by that door, to number 13, I could swear I could hear noises coming from inside. Footsteps, quiet arguing, even sometimes the door jiggling. Each time something like that happened, I could feel my soul dying just a little bit more. I would soon after catch myself, though, unlocking my door and entering my safe haven to get lost in books, video games, and other hobbies. At my job, I tend to work later sometimes if I need to speak to a team in America, or if I just can't face waking up early. I work for a large firm as an analyst, although I wouldn't want to get into too much detail regarding that, and since it was bang in the middle of winter, it tended to get really dark around 4:30 or 5. I would walk down the public driveway and look up to my apartment, only to notice that the blinds next door were shut. I didn't remember if they were always like that, as I had never focused on it before, but something felt immediately off, as if you were looking at a puzzle, only to notice the piece right in the center was missing. I climbed up the stairs leading to my door, lost in my thoughts. I was having a particularly bad time at work during then. Staring at the steps in front of me, I found myself on that same landing. But this time, something was wrong. I could smell something was off. I immediately thought it was just rubbish from downstairs that had yet to be collected. But there was something different. The air felt heavier, almost tangible, as I approached the door. There was this smell of rotting meat I had never noticed before. I kneeled down by the door, letting my backpack to the side as I leaned against it. From there was that smell. My mind raced, as I could not immediately pin what on earth was causing it. I laid on my front and tried to look through the gap under the door, only to immediately start gagging, almost vomiting as I keeled back. I gripped the carpet, rolling away and knocking over a couple of things as I clenched my chest. It was like the smell of death. Have you ever smelt a dead animal? A fox on the side of a path that's rotting? You could see its rib cage slightly poking out as maggots writhe and squirm. It was that sort of smell. I stared through that gap in the door, only to be met by pitch black. I could have sworn that for a moment I saw something pushed to the side, but I couldn't bring myself to stay there any longer. I darted up and retreated into my room, calling my dad and telling him all about it. It wasn't too long after that, maybe a day or so, when I heard the building manager had gone into the property. And that was it. No one would say anything else about it. No one would tell me what happened, and when I asked, they refused. I saw this peculiar look in my dad's eyes when I tried to ask him about it. It beckoned me to shut up and accept that sometimes answers won't give you closure. I never found out what was behind that door, and I don't think I want to know either. I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me when I get a nasty shiver racing down my spine whenever I look at that painted door, treating whatever was in there as a gentle facade, much like how some wear a mask to hide what's behind their own eyes. I sometimes swear I can still smell it, whatever it was. That's how strong the presence was. I still sometimes think that someone must have been dead on the other side, but I don't think I'll ever know, and I don't think I'll be looking either. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride at around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had to ride about 2 blocks back by myself. Because of a construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk. The streets were dead at that time of night. It wasn't a problem, until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. I noticed this man walking by himself, maybe in his 40s, a little bit scruffy, but definitely not homeless. The sidewalk was really narrow. I didn't want to freak him out, so I got about 6 feet behind him. When I said, "Hey, coming behind," he turned around and just immediately gave me this very angry look. I began to turn down my street when I noticed he had started following me, literally screaming about how I was a cunt and he was going to murder me. I lived right off the corner, and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. This is not the scary part yet, though. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I could see him standing right on my front porch, staring out at the street, like this motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but this time he just stared and didn't say a single thing. I ended up going back to my friend's house, but I did notice that my bike was mysteriously stolen from the alleyway by my house just 2 days later. Also, the guy in question was definitely not actually homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill in that area, unfortunately. So if I didn't think that sidewalk was too narrow to pass by, I otherwise wouldn't have even disturbed him. Half of the scary part is that he looked like a pretty much completely normal guy for my area.